especially when it comes to delivering large-scale, complex projects. As both governments and private sector explore new ways to plan, procure, and execute these projects, that one word continues to gain increasing attention: collaboration. We've heard a lot about it over the last 2 days. We see that collectively we're thinking differently, not just about how we deliver projects, but how we engage the people and organizations involved in them. With these new methods come new challenges as well as new opportunities, especially when it comes to aligning the expectations of project owners, including government agencies, with the private sector's need for flexibility and competitive value. I know I'm really looking forward to this great discussion and learning more from those that are hands-on involved in some of Canada's groundbreaking projects. So I'll ask all of you to please join me in welcoming to the stage Jaime Freyre, Chief Operating Officer, Major Projects, Pomerleau; Richard Barrett, Executive Vice President, Regional Chief Executive, Canada, AECOM; Michael Lindsay, President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario; and Edward Ng, Partner, Infrastructure and Project Finance Advisory, EY Canada. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thank you for coming and helping us close out the show. It's been I think fantastic 2 days, but I'm not going to lie, this is a great panel to kind of close out, because in every session, in every discussion in the hallways, people have been talking about collaboration and new models. So I think this is a great way for sort of us to kind of cap it all off. And maybe I'll start there, and Jaime, maybe I'll start with you, because there has been a lot of discussions. It came up in both panels earlier today. In terms of the future of P3s, the need for greater collaboration regardless of model. Is there something or things that you've heard maybe that really has resonated with you?
First of all, thank you everybody for hosting this meeting and with these fantastic colleagues. So what to tell you? I think that the collaboration and the discussions that we have been having these days has been fantastic. But what resonates for me is that we are extremely confident about the market. No? We have a strong market, we have a strong pipeline, so there are fantastic news for everybody. Second, I would like to share certain concerns. For me, the main concerns that I see in the market is, and that I have heard, is the scarcity of resources. I think that we are facing a lot of things and we don't have the full capacity to cover it. Secondly, I think that we have a problem with behaviors. I think that we have to work a lot on the behaviors. We are coming from a market extremely confrontational, and we need to be able to change it. And a third concern that I think that is important is that we are seeing that the budgets are getting bigger and bigger, and we fully understand the concerns of the public entities and investors, because the money is a lot. No? Mm-hmm. And from the standpoint of view of Pomerleau, and I think that it's a really, really nice moment. We have been developing a lot this kind of approach in order to give the good service, with good examples in Waha here in Ontario, in Fraser River, in British Columbia, and for sure in Quebec, where we are most of the time based, but fantastic and very enthusiastic with the future.
Great. And I'd love to hear from each of you, just in terms of things that you might have heard over the past 2 days and what kind of is resonating. Maybe Richard?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. And it's fantastic to be here. I've only been in Canada a year, and this is the second time that I've managed to get along to the conference, and very interested in hearing the conversations. Been hearing lots of things. We had an event finished at 11 o'clock. Well, I thought it finished at 11. People went home at 1 last night. But there was, so there was lots of discussion about the market and the collaboration. I agree with what Jaime's saying, that there is so much happening. It's one of the things that really attracted me to come to Toronto and to Canada. And but what I've heard is that people are really interested to understand scope, risk, to really understand the outcomes that we're driving to be able to price that risk and get that certainty before we kind of lock things down. And I've certainly heard that this has come about through some I guess some negative experiences that have occurred, and I can draw some contrast to Australia, because over the last 20 years that's certainly been the case. There's been a few times where owners government owners in Australia have taken stock of some poor project outcomes and looked to innovate the delivery approaches, engaged with industry around that. And inevitably what I've seen each occasion come out of that is a need for greater or more collaboration as one of the key paths to getting better outcomes. So, yeah.
Michael, how about, I mean, a different perspective being on the public sector side?
I was going to say that those government owners, they'll get you. Look, thank you, Lisa, to the whole team at CCCCP. It's always great to be here. Look, I don't think we've talked about collaboration over the last few days so much as we've actually been collaborating over the past few days. And that's certainly the way that my team ultimately feels about it. I think this jurisdiction, when compared with others, is very fortunate that three things are true. Number one, we've developed over the last 10 to 15 years with one another a routinized, reliable, structured way to talk to one another about the projects that are coming and how we want to deliver them. And your organization, this organization, has been such an important part of that and continues to be. Second, we have elected officials, broadly speaking, across the Government of Ontario that actively take advice and listen as to what we think has to happen in order to achieve the outcomes that they want, which are these projects delivered in a timely and cost-effective way in order to benefit taxpayers. So again, the insights, the intel, not only through these sessions, but in the conversations that we have through this conference, they directly inform the kinds of things that we then go to talk to the Government of Ontario about in respect of imperatives for how we achieve what is an incredibly ambitious capital plan. And third, I think we have an ability, and this doesn't exist everywhere, to be candid with one another, right? Both on stage, whether structured as a debate or as a panel, I think that we get really to bedrock in respect of what collaboration genuinely means, and that's important. Because my experience before I came back to IO 4 or 5 years ago, you have a lot of jurisdictions that talk about valence values like collaboration and partnership, but defining with specificity what that means is the important thing that has to happen, and I think we do it here. So I'm so delighted that over the course of a couple of days again, we've had precisely this forum to do that.
How about you, Andrade?
I'd echo the same, and I'd probably just add that, we're probably still also working on kind of how best to collaborate. We've been talking so much about it, and there's just a lot now more discussion on, what tools can we use and what approaches can we use that can help enable us to be able to effectively collaborate. And when I kind of reflect off the last couple of days and I think about kind of the work that I do for public sector clients, there isn't a single conversation I have with a client when, even for early feasibility stages of a project, when we're talking about different delivery models, there isn't a conversation that we have that doesn't involve, should we think about progressive or other collaborative approaches? And if you even just look back 2 years ago, that might not have even entered the conversation. So it's really just really shows just how things have shifted so quickly and so dramatically.
It came up, I think Janine from WSP raised it this morning in the panel on mega projects. Just about definition, I was thinking, I'm the parent of 2 teenagers, and I know when I ask them to help me around the house, we have very different definitions of what that collaborative approach might be. So I'm just, I'm wondering, and Janine sort of she had a definition that she shared, and I'm just wondering, how do we define it? Is it possible? Do we all have the same views? And Jaime, maybe I'll start with you.
Certainly, we don't have the same views. I think because collaboration is so personal, and if I ask anybody here in the room, everybody has a perception of collaboration, and everybody thinks that they collaborate very well. But every day we face frustration and we face conflicts, even though we think that we are collaborating. No? So I think that there's no lawyer here that can be writing down what is collaboration, and there is something that can fit for everybody. No? But for me, if I have to summarize it, for me collaboration is based on transparency, is based on alignment in the objectives, and fundamentally on trust. We cannot build up any kind of relation without trust. And as well, it's very important that collaboration, it doesn't mean that we get agreements on everything. Collaboration means as well with challenging the other part, with being able to have tough discussions, but under an environment of respect, environment that we are trying to find the best for project, and that we are trying to find the solution that match the expectations of all the stakeholders.
I see you nodding there. Richard, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, a lot of it resonates, and Edward kind of mentioned this as well, that I think there's not a clear understanding or clear agreement really on what collaboration is, and I think sometimes we think that the agreement says that it's a collaborative agreement, so therefore we must be collaborating, but it really is, it does, I think in terms of principles, I do see that it does require that, I'd expect to see openness, I expect to see trust, I expect to see, but the hard conversations, those robust conversations happening, but happening with a focus to getting to a solution, and not just a solution, but happening to also find ideas and innovations to actually get better outcomes. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of, you can set out a range of principles for it, but I think it's also important for us just to understand really and agree why we are collaborating, and that is to get successful owners, successful outcomes for owners, but as a principle, not just owners, to maximise value for all of the participants who are collaborating together in the project. So.
Michael, maybe I'll turn to you, because I mean, I think what I'm hearing is there is a bit of subjectivity to the definition of collaboration. So, you know, on your end, how do you sort of, as a procuring authority, look at to evaluate collaboration, and is it changing your processes, the way you work?
Yeah, if you'll permit me, I'll come back to how we evaluate it, because I think that's something that's very specific, and I want to treat with it. But that panel this morning was exceptional. And as she almost always does, I think Angela really captured, right, what we think of when we think of collaboration, and it's almost indistinguishable from compromise, right? So we take a very tactical view of what it means to collaborate. And we're thinking mostly about, can we be honest with one another in respect of what kind of design we have for an asset, what the opportunities are to innovate, to change our base expectation about what kind of assets should be delivered. Can we be transparent? Jaime's right, about costs. Can we share information both ways about what the market is telling us something should cost in one of the most volatile times in recent history, while we specify with precision what our affordability criteria ultimately are? When things go wrong, do we get into a conversation immediately with an orientation around compromise vis-a-vis how we solve a problem and think about the legal and claims implications of that as we go? So all of that I would define as the kind of very tactile and tactical collaboration that we're aiming for. How we evaluate the presence of that with any counterparty is something, I will be honest with you, I think we're still learning about. Like the first phase of this from other jurisdictions, the bog standard answer was, you know, collaborative behavioral assessments is what you had to do within procurements. You would put teams together, you would see what the dynamic looked like, and you'd have a third party write up if you had a collaborative dynamic or not. I will simply say that I don't think that that has revealed itself to be an excellent way to assess whether collaboration, especially over a project with a gestation period of 10 years, is going to be present. So for us, what we have to try to do, I think, as a contracting authority, is think about, on the basis of revealed experience and the way in which projects have gone, how do we think about seeking out the right collaborative partners? And what does that mean about the way in which we think about the value on an RFQ submission to us of a project? And whether we're aiming for volume of projects done as a proxy for expertise in collaboration, or if we're giving ourselves more license to actually think about what the lived experience has been with counterparties. But I'll just say it's a very good question, so that we are still on receive in respect of how do we think about, in competitive public tendering processes, having enough scoring and space to really value collaborative partners.
Yeah, I think that evaluation piece is going to be really tricky, right? I think that's going to take some time and probably some collaborative approaches to even get to a common definition, right? Edward, you do a lot of work with governments, you know, across the country. what has been your experience sort of in this area then in terms of providing advice?
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing a lot of, completely agree with what everyone has said, and Michael's comments about how do you evaluate for it, but really thinking through beyond evaluating for it, when you're in those difficult, high-pressured situations, once you have your partner on board, how do you ensure that collaboration continues? So it's about creating incentives in the contract. It's like getting to that tactical level of like what tools do you and will you have in place in order to ensure that collaboration? So, I just think of often there's talk about openness, transparency, open book, all those sorts of things, but how is that happening? Is there a common technology platform that is shared and used by both parties, for example, where all the information goes so that it truly is open book, so that you can, when you're building up costs, you can see it at great detail, or when you're looking at individual risks and quantifying them, that all that information is transparent, discussed, and hopefully mitigated. But also one piece of advice that we see clients really taking to heart is, if you're going to have a collaborative project, if you're going to have a progressive project, the need to really also build up your own capabilities as well. So it's that sort of cultural shift on the client side of what does it mean to be a collaborative partner. It's not sort of an adversarial approach, us versus them approach anymore. It's more about, how do we staff up? How do we make sure that we're working with them side by side through a development phase to come up with a solution and, hopefully both benefit from that process.
So I think largely, and I haven't heard anybody say that they don't agree, but we all agree, I think collaboration needs to happen more, regardless of model. We are in the business of partnerships. We've got new types of models. But again, difficult to evaluate, difficult to have a common definition. So I guess maybe, Richard, I'll turn to you. From your perspective, are there factors that are limiting or undermining collaboration right now that we need to think about?
I think there's just maybe some things from my experience that I see are really important for enhancing and really maximising collaboration, Lisa. And in the Australian context, the move to collaborative delivery models really started in the public sector 25 years ago. I've been fortunate to be involved with a lot of that journey on different projects, but it did start with an agency, transport agency in one state, to address issues in delivery. They looked to actually going to pure alliancing, and they had a number of early successes with that, including they actually took some existing design build projects that were not going well and transferred those into alliances, and ultimately got some better outcomes with that. But I would have to say there was a lot of skepticism about that and how that would work. But ultimately, the outcomes, I think, on an objective assessment were seen as positive, and that did progress across more broadly in the industry and across the country. And I would say with that, I think the owner's commitment, the owner's determination is really, really important, because I hate to say it's a journey, but you are going to learn along the way and get better at it, and need that commitment. The other thing I would say is about that commitment and that learning is that it is delivering collaboratively for our industry is a cultural shift, and hard dollar delivery was very rusted on and still is in some places today, and making a cultural shift at an industry scale is not easy to do, and it's not just a collaborative assessment at the start. It actually requires to be observing along the way how we're establishing these projects and getting them in flight, and then how we're dealing with that as we progress as well. And even when you have the same model, I've seen lots of examples of projects that have gone well, some that have done outstanding, but a few that haven't done well. Mm-hmm. And one of the big factors I have seen in that, and have had this conversation a few times, ultimately, right, a lot does come down to, you can have a great model, but it does come down to people and how they work together. And I think the leadership in particular at a couple of levels, and leaders need to have technical skill, they need to have good project management skill and business skill, but they also need to be able to kind of move from a pure commercial focus to a stakeholder focus. And they need to be great leaders. They need to be able to, I think, just have high levels of authenticity and integrity and be able to motivate and work with complexity and with the teams that they're working with. So there's a couple of things.
No, that's great. And Jaime, right at the outset, I think you highlighted some potential concerns, right? Are there things that you think need to be addressed to really sort of maximize collaboration?
Well, I think that we need to be patient, no? One of the problems that we are having in this market is that we are now in a transition to a more collaborative approach. But we do really need to change the concept of that we are having people who manage contracts to people and teams who manage projects, no? Independently of the contract that you have, if you put people in order to read it in the way that you want to read it, you are going to have confrontation, no? And we need to ensure that people are looking at the project, no? But that is going to need time, no? And this kind of major projects that we are doing in a collaborative is going to take years, no? And the market and the public sector and the private sector, we had to give a chance to this to succeed, no? And in the resource side that we were talking a little bit before, I think that as well we need to change a little bit how we have built up the organization. No? We were discussing with Michael some weeks ago. No? We have building up organizations that are prepared for confrontation. No? And we have a lot of clients that are very well staffed to protect the contractual matter. No? Today we have to bring expertise at both sides of the table. The expertise has to come from both sides, public, private, working for solutions. And I think that this is going to require as well a change in the capabilities and capacities of the different actors that we are involved.
Okay. Edward, what about you in terms of opportunities to really sort of maximize?
Yeah, I think it's, it was one of the panels this morning, I think, that talked a lot about the cross-pollination kind of resources between the public and private sector, and that really helping to kind of optimize collaboration, just bringing the understanding from kind of either sides of the table to any sort of a discussion. I think that's key. I think there's a lot of talk about, what sort of capabilities are available kind of externally, expertise that we can bring in to kind of build on these collaborative relationships where, there might be more mature markets that kind of deal with this regularly. I think that's important, but I think that also needs to be balanced with trying to build the capability internally as well. So, realizing that you can't always go out for the resources and capabilities that you need, and instead of trying to maybe just augment your existing resources with kind of resources kind of with the right experience.
I think this morning, Alexandra and Angela, they had a really good marriage analogy, I think, talking about sort of the relationships in terms of, the partnership on both sides of the equation for a project. And maybe Michael, there's some element, I think, of what Edward just said that I'll pick up on, that, on your end, and I have a public sector background, I know how hard sometimes it can be to get the right people to see the draw into the public sector. So, how do you feel about sort of skill sets and capacity to really sort of do these new types of approaches or different ways of thinking about things?
A critical strategic imperative for us, and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. If you've heard me speak before, I think in any fora, you would have heard me say, it keeps me up at night. I want to nod at the reality of what Jaime has said. The organization was incredibly, incredibly talented and has been for a long time, Infrastructure Ontario. And by the way, the cross-pollination that you referenced is visible in front of us, right? In respect of the alumni who have been on both sides of that question. But the organization was built primarily to manage commercially contracts that were in force. Mm-hmm. And so as we started to take strategic steps to introduce new models, 100%, it was the key question that was on our mind: how do we go and get the relevant expertise to be able to inhabit new models? And in point of fact, I know other jurisdictions have made a different choice, but for me, I actually thought that at least initially it was somewhat limiting of the models that we could ultimately use. It felt far more natural and far more possible for us to take steps towards the progressive models that we've introduced than to go all the way to New South Wales was and England was and start to deliver everything via an alliance. Both because I didn't think the plumbing of government was ready for that, nor did I think that we had the competencies to do it. Now, I think we have spent 4 years reorienting, if I could put it this way, culturally as well as on a capability basis, IO. And I'm so proud of my team that's here today for having achieved that evolution. And to your point, having used it for real success on a variety of projects, no matter what kind of contract we were using, right? I think that journey continues for us. And alongside the capabilities has to be the right permissive type of relationship that we will have with the government of Ontario, who, as I say, trusts us, to make sure that we have real delegated decision-making and authority, not only to make choices quickly when things go wrong, but frankly also to make definitive choices in order to move projects forward. One of the big things that worried me when we first went to progressive models was, were we going to create a cycle by which it would be very difficult to ever put a pin in a project? Say, okay, now design is done. I think we've done that reasonably well, but we need to continue that kind of logic. And it's not just the people that are in-house to IO that have to embrace it. It's also the various technical advisors and third parties that we rely upon, who are indispensable to us to actually advance these projects. PDCs and TAs and legal services, all of that also has to be structured in the right way so incentives are aligned. So you'll continue to see us taking steps to make sure that those partnerships are predicated upon incentives that try to align people to project progress, as opposed to time and materials. And then the last thing that I would say is I would not be accurate in depicting our journey if I didn't nod with great gratitude and appreciation at the Board of Directors of Infrastructure Ontario, which continues to be an exceptionally talented, highly suited in respective expertise and experience board that has interrogated us in the right ways over the last 4 years in respect of what we wanted to do, particularly as we were taking back huge risk for the province of Ontario, full stop, but also bringing their expertise and their learning and their perspective to the table. And so we can inhabit an event like this where literally, one of my directors is not only known to everybody here, but is moderating a panel on these types of topics. I feel very fortunate to live in that kind of dynamic.
And are you attracting the right type of talent? Is it changing the way you sort of look at, your job postings and how you bring people in?
Absolutely. Look, I think I'm fortunate in the sense that I have a lead bottom ability, conviction, that everybody that I bring to IO comes first and foremost because they want to make life better for the people of Ontario. Everybody. Whether I can compensate them, right, relative to the other options that are out there is a continuing conversation, just to be candid. But again, thanks to my board of directors and the government of Ontario, I think we're able, right, to create a compelling employee value proposition. And I think we're also fortunate that that cross-pollination happens, and that people are in and out and back and forth. It's a real sign of strength for the province of Ontario. But the answer to your question is yes, 100%. When we go out now to find people to deliver various types of projects, our job postings look a lot different than they used to. And I personally am on receive from anybody in the room that has advice for me about how I do that better. Because I cannot identify anything that I think is more consequential to our ability to continue to succeed.
Maybe Jaime and Richard, I'll turn to you guys as well too. I mean, is it changing the way, not just how you put a team together, but when you bring in new people, are you looking for, how you're balancing technical versus sort of the softer skills? Maybe, Richard, I see you nodding, maybe I'll start with you.
Absolutely it is, and I do see a need for the right talents absolutely recognised in the discussions I have, and I also see a focus on making that happen. So I do see it in a couple of ways. I do see it in terms of bringing certain talent capabilities from outside in, and a focus really on how do we develop those capabilities and skills from within as well. And I know that inside our organisation, we're not the only organisation here in Canada doing that, and it's really great to see. So.
Yeah, same for you.
I have to add a little bit that attracting in major projects, and normally we are talking of major projects, attraction is there. So it's easy to attract people to large infrastructure projects. As well, I have to say that nobody wants to work in a confrontational environment. I think that everybody that has been in a project that is not going well, it's not nice to wake up every morning, to go to work, to be fighting, and to live a very, 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 very difficult situation. No? So I do really think that when we are portraying projects, large scale, complex, with the right contract, I think that is going to attract a lot of talent. And as well, we have to redefine what is a leader. No? You were mentioning the leadership. No? The leaders, I do really think that they need to be more and more in the soft skills. And the technical knowledge is going to come within the team. But if the leader is not promoting collaboration, if they don't really believe that you need to give a step forward in order to make your team able to understand that we need to collaborate and we need to find win-win solutions, I think that we will fail. And I do really think that more and more soft skills are becoming more important.
Lisa, sorry,
Yeah.
I might just add, I think it's really important also just to think and look across the country and across jurisdictions. It's not, not every jurisdiction is going to be able to attract all the resources that they need.
Yeah.
And so going back to Richard's point and the point I was making earlier, oftentimes it's going to be really important to think about just, what you can do to build the capabilities yourself, because, not everyone's going to be able to attract the same talent, and not all projects will attract all the right people that they need.
And I think that's a really important point, Everett. I mean, you're part of the Municipal Engagement Advisory Group, and we know the municipalities across Canada have various, come in various shapes and sizes and various, levels of capacity to deliver these projects. So I think it's important to consider that as well too. So thank you for raising that. I want to switch a little bit. I mean, we've talked about the behavioral side, the skill sets, and how does that translate into sort of models? We've heard a lot about sort of, progressive model, progressive P3s, bringing in, contractor earlier, and that really, being a collaborative sort of approach. I want to shift a little bit, just to, selfishly. We published a paper in August, our P3 policy primer, and we kind of made some assumptions about progressives, and I just kind of like to test that with you guys. And I think, what we heard from industry, I think what we're realizing, and that's a bit of an evergreen document, if things shift and, we can always adapt as an industry, but, really that the progressives maybe, as opposed to sort of the more traditional, might be better suited for the really large, the really complex, so multi-billion dollars or extremely, complex projects. Does that sit right with you guys? And it connects a bit to the mega projects conversation this morning as well too, because I think there were some assumptions they had as well too, that in those mega projects, that collaborative piece is key. But maybe I'll test that with you guys as well too.
I think that is not only a question of size. The size brings certain complexity, but I think that is more a question of complexity. Number of interface, complexity of the interface, and being able to assess the risks. What we always said is that we need to find the right contract for the right project. There's not a single recipe. And looking at the holistic approach as well, I think that we have to understand the maturity of the construction sector in a certain project and the maturity of the client. I think that as well we have to be able to put contracts that fit with the lineup of people and resources that we have at that moment. But for sure, I think that the progressive is today one of the areas that is bringing more capacity to the market to face the challenges. And we have to remain very humble and very focused. That is not a question of having collaborative, that all the projects are going to be a success. That we need to find the right contractual framework to the right project, independently of the complexity or the size of the project.
Yeah. I do agree that because of the level of input that's required to procure, establish, set up teams to deliver progressive models. I think they do lend themselves to larger projects because of the upfront cost involved in that, and the complex. But I also think that even for some smaller projects, it's a model that can be considered, given that the ability of progressive approaches to price in risk and to manage risk. And certainly I've seen some experience of projects, $50 million, less than that kind of range, in remote parts of Australia where resources are scarce, logistics are complex or challenging, and you have a very short window between wet seasons to actually build anything. And these types of progressive models have been successfully applied in that type of environment, and I'm sure there's similar things here in Canada where that could be considered. So I'd certainly keep that on the playing field. And Michael made the comment earlier about when looking at the right approach here in Ontario and deciding on the path forward and what was selected. And I think it just comes to models, because I do think we actually, when we talk progressive, there are a range of models that can be used. And I think we need to really think about each of those, how much of the risk is allocated, how much of it is mutually owned and managed, as an example of that. So, yeah.
I see you nodding there, Michael. Does that sort of resonate with you?
Agreed. Look, just to treat with the spirit of your question, saw the paper, by the way, well done. I thought it was great, read it avidly. For certain large and complex projects, and I think Angela said this morning as well, we sort of have no choice but to embrace the model. We need a market for our projects. That was, let's be candid, the initial impulse behind its creation, right? But now that we've lived with it for a while, I'll tell you the two things that I like most about the progressive model. Number one, we get real investment in design, infused with the expertise of construction firms, such that we never find ourselves in a place downstream, or I haven't yet at least, where we failed to identify that there was a massive constructability issue that would crop up and make things adversarial quite fast. And I think one of the corrections that's happened even on the P3 models we continue to deliver is, how do we make sure that the consortia that are forming are doing that, right? That as we get 30% design in a bid envelope, that enough investment has been done, not on spec, but actually done, right, to make sure that we've met that test. The progressive model just really ensures it. The second thing that I like about the progressive model so far, and this will build on your remarks, is it allows us as the contracting authority to have a very transparent conversation with government about how you provision for risk financially. And that's critical, right? And that's very different than what the approach used to be of applying 5 to 10% of the design and construction costs of a job as being the contingency, and not even having that be funded, having to go back to government and Treasury Board to ask for those dollars. Through the progressive model, it's a little bit the plumbing of government, but I think it's important, we're now able with real precision to say, okay, probabilistically, if this risk hits, what is its cost to government, to bake that into the total project cost, and then to have a funded contingency associated with it, which makes it far more possible for us to make those decisions quickly with delegated authority. So there are many jobs that might be large or small, for which I think both of those things can be very important. I think CCCCC is right that disproportionately, at least to date, where we've really tried to apply these models is on large and complex projects.
Yeah. Edward, I mean, you've talked about the capacity issues in jurisdictions across the country, but is size and complexity something you think about as well too when
it is,
working
and
with
it's
the other
something
governments?
that, especially if I'm putting my municipal advisory group hat on. Like, it is something that we think about, and it's something we address even in, and here's a plug for the tools that were published last week, but the municipal guide. But it is really something that we encourage our clients to think about. So for me, I tend to agree with the idea that progressive, at least right now, as we're still trying to figure it out, is more suitable for larger or more complex projects. You think about the resources that are required from the public sector to be able to cooperate and work in the spirit of what is intended by progressives, and it does require a lot of resources, talent, people, energy, and so if they don't have that, it's really difficult to, I think, contribute effectively in a progressive environment. So that is definitely something that we think is important to keep in mind.
Yeah. Richard, I mean, I think maybe, you've come to Canada, you've got experience internationally. Progressive P3s seems to be uniquely Canadian, at least in name, at this point in time. Is there stuff we can be learning from other countries that are doing similar types of things?
I think well, my experience is Australia, a bit in New Zealand before coming here, and I see a lot of, I actually in that P3 space and progressive space, particularly your question there, I see a lot more similarities really than differences, and it's not surprising because Australia does look to Canada for experience in terms of how to deliver successful P3 programs. There's a lot more that happen here in Canada, and Australia really sees Canada as a kind of global leader in this space. And the flip side, I know that in the collaborative delivery, some of the experience and the development of that in the industry in Australia has been shared here with Canada. So a lot of shared knowledge, a lot of similarities. I don't think there is one, even when you took a progressive model, one model, because the other thing I see that's similar is they're both big countries, and the adoption and the adaptation of the models used it differs where you go. And I think both countries use really robust market sounding with industry in making decisions about that procurement. I do see, though, that when it gets to progressives, both countries are doing in the vertical space, in hospitals, in schools and other social infrastructure, successfully applying progressive P3s, much more so here in Canada. But when you get into that linear infrastructure space, the scale of the projects and the complexity of those projects, I just see both countries are really kind of giving robust thinking to what is the right place for us to utilise a progressive P3 model. And just speaking from the Australian experience, there have been a couple, and I think the approach has really been to focus on more defined, large, but defined components of scope, where I think owners see more of an ability to compare apples with apples, and where they, I think, sort of think the risk is more contained. And so they've been large tunnel components, sometimes with station components incorporated into those. So, and the challenge as the complexity gets bigger is the cost of running a competitive progressive procurement with two proponents through to getting to a financial position. So I think that's really about solving how we balance competitiveness with fairness and getting good value for the public, the best public outcomes with the cost involved, really.
Yeah. Jaime, are you looking at international examples in terms of how you do things at Pomerleau?
In Pomerleau, we are trying to focus on what we have in Canada. I think that the pipeline in Canada is enough in order to stop thinking about other markets, no?
And for sure, we have international experience, and we are learning from other countries. But everything, I think, that is based on having the right model, or the right project.
So very made in Canada.
And yes, and I think that because in the moment that you put the line of a contract, now you have to live in the line. And engaging with the market, engaging with the reality of each project. You were mentioning remote areas, not remote areas, in the middle of the downtown or not. We need to find the right contract model in order that contractors, the private sector, can evaluate the risk properly and can have a successful project for the client and for the rest of the people that are involved. No?
Edward, I know you and I worked at one point in time together on something that took us down a route of looking at other places and how things, do things. I mean, is Canada a trailblazer in this, or are we sort of adapting a bit as well too, and in terms of what other people are doing?
I mean, definitely trailblazer in the idea of using progressives and using in the way that we use it. But I chuckle when Richard says that Australia looks at Canada all the time, because I feel like we're always looking at other jurisdictions like Australia to see what they're doing. But I absolutely just lots of jurisdictional scans. I can't tell you how many jurisdictional scans I've done just to see what else is happening in other markets in the progressive space. So, I would say that it is somewhat unique in kind of exactly how we're looking at it, but, definitely when we're looking at other markets, there's elements of what we consider to be a progressive project and what we consider to be collaborative projects in other markets. And even when I look south of the border, I echo Richard's comment about other jurisdictions looking at us. Certainly, we know a lot of the US projects are looking at some of how the projects are going to play out here before they implement south of the border.
I know, Michael, you guys talk often as provincial governments and procuring authorities across the country. Are you having the discussions with your counterparts here and in other countries as well too?
Indubitably. And look, again, CCCCP plays such a prominent role in that. But, even in the space of today, thanks to Mark and Corey and others that we've been talking to quite actively, I think that that's the other thing that we've got going for us. It's back to my three things that I started with. There isn't a lot of jealousy as between Canadian jurisdictions in trying to share the lessons learned about how these models are working, notwithstanding the fact that, let's be honest with one another, we live in a continental market for infrastructure services, and we are each other's competition to some extent. So again, I think that that is something that's precious and very important about the way in which we're able to conduct our business, and I just can't say thanks enough to the other jurisdictions that share with us.
So, there's the behavioral side. We've talked about that. We've talked about sort of how progressives are. It's a new procurement strategy really to get to an end result. Are you, now that you're embarking on these new types of models, are you taking those lessons learned and then translating them back into sort of the more traditional P3s as well too? Maybe Michael, I'll start with you.
Again, yeah, absolutely. And what I would say is that it isn't just how progressives reverse colonize P3s, but how various models that we use make us all more collaborative and more efficient, to use a different adjective, right? So, for example, we learned things delivering 1,000 acres of earthworks using a very traditional contract for the new VW electric battery plant in St. Thomas that we immediately deployed to all of our projects, regardless of model. Mostly in that case, for what it's worth, about alignment with local municipality and the permitting that goes with that and how to expedite some of that stuff. When we work with partners to understand how best, in a progressive way, to think about the feedback given to us by 9 coastal communities in James Bay about a brand new hospital that will replace the oldest hospital in the province of Ontario, we try to immediately port some of that knowledge and process about stakeholder management to all of our projects, whether they're DBF or progressive, right? But yeah, I think the most tangible way we're probably doing that will be most familiar to people in the room is when we learn something about the market's appetite for risk and the way in which they think about where that risk needs to sit and how it needs to be managed. That's one of the most tangible ways that I would argue that progressives are now having a real impact even on the DBFs that we're putting in.
Yeah, Jaime, is that happening with you guys as well too? Are you taking the experiences from one project, one type of model, and then translating that into other projects, other models?
Absolutely. I don't want to repeat, but all the companies and all the different contract models are bringing good experience, bad experience. And I think that the intention of everybody is trying to be more efficient. What we want is to find successful ways of delivering projects for everybody. And for sure, the lessons learned that we have been having is fundamental. Michael was referring to the WAHA project that we have just started. And I think that this is a very good example of collaboration, of understanding the needs of the communities, understanding the needs of the client, and working from the moment of the conception to find a win-win solution for everybody. Absolutely.
There's a couple of questions from the audience. I might turn to one, because one is interesting, because we've talked about skill set, capacity, hiring new people, building within the team. There's a question here about what governance can clients put in place to ensure collaboration with their partners. So there's the people aspect, and then there's all how you all organize yourselves. So are there some things that are changing on the governance side to encourage it?
Well, I talked about the indispensability of good oversight, and we certainly have it at IO. That matters. Look, let me hum you a verse on one other governance-related theme. Having lived on the other side, one of the things that I think I tried to do and my team has been trying to do is to make sure that there is a clear counterparty on the Government of Ontario's side in respect of making decisions, owning projects, and advancing them, right? I think that one of the real things that can inhibit progress and efficiency and effective collaboration, I know again, because I was once on the other side, is if you have a multi-headed, complex decision-making process where multiple agencies of government or broader public sector entities have decision-making rights that seem obscure or Byzantine, right, to the other side. So we've tried to spend a lot of time, whether it's on transit or transportation or even in our relationships with hospital partners, clarifying that governance, because the assignation of decision rights is really important to be transparent about. And I would say, again, I'm just endlessly on receive if we've managed to do it to an extent that is now giving real predictability to counterparties, and you can count on me to take that message quite directly to the Government of Ontario. We need to be a predictable decision maker to our market, and I think that is very much a governance question.
Richard, have you seen changes in sort of governance approaches to facilitate?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael. We really need to be able to make informed decisions very quickly. And I think understanding that organisational governance, so there is an aligned approach for kind of outreach and conversation on the various levels that are required, that's really important for us to have. Yeah.
And as well, I think that it's important, this governance, to manage perceptions. No? Because one of the problems of this project is this collaboration. When perceptions start to build up that people are not behaving, I think that this is something that has to be addressed immediately at the highest level in order to ensure that we are not allowing building up distrust or building up a lack of transparency. We need to be very careful about that people stay aligned with the process.
And I was just going to say, look, I think another area of focus in terms of that decision-making and governance is just really looking hard at that, at the pipeline, the industry capacity as well, because we are building the capabilities that we need, and we're, I know, all working hard to bring that to bear for the success of the taxpayers of Ontario, but working together with industry on that is really important. Yeah.
If I could come in, legitimately, I tried to get a bunch of elected officials from the Government of Ontario to come stand in the back of this room with fake mustaches on.
Yeah.
Just to hear the industry's feedback on capacity, because I keep telling elected officials, I think that when you're in front of the Premier or a minister, you're naturally a touch shy about saying that there are real technical limits to capacity. But what you've just mentioned is such an important thing. We work very hard with all of you in the room to try to meter our pipeline and to do it transparently. And in a way that makes sure that it's digestible, notwithstanding its huge ambition. And so my ask, I think, would be, you can be an important part of helping the Government of Ontario with its governance by being as honest and authentic as you possibly can be with government officials about the limits from a capacity perspective that we face, whether it's labor or critical trades or the availability of insurance or financing. That's a very important theme for us collectively to continue to tell truth to power on.
So it's a bit of a new era, right? We've got these new types of models in the market, early stages. You know, we've got some groundbreaking projects. So what does success look like? And are we documenting lessons learned? Maybe I'll ask each of you that question. Jaime, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, I think that that's a good question. Success, when you are making a team approach, is that the team feel proud, feel that they have been able to find the right solution, and at the end, we have got to a position where everybody considers that we have done the best. No? And I can share some experiences with this, and just a feeling that you have been able to arrive to the minimum cost and the best schedule. No? And this is something that when you have been working in a collaborative, you can feel it, no? Because its reality is that people felt the project, step in when there is a problem, and everybody was rowing in the same direction. Lessons learned, I think that we have to talk about as well the risk of the collaborative. No? And I think that it has been mentioned, we need to be very careful that when we open a lot the capacity to come out with ideas, we end up spinning around a lot of optioneering, and what if, and what if, and what if, and we are not progressing. No? So talking about leadership as well and having the right mentality is important, that in this collaborative we have people taking decisions and aligning in order that we are progressing at the right speed, because there is a risk of spinning around many optioneering, and that can harm. That's a lesson learned.
Yeah. Richard, how about for you?
I agree. Absolutely. We have to achieve satisfaction for the owners, and that as an outcome, achieve good outcomes for all of the participants in it. I think success looks like building positive relationships, more positive relationships across our industry, and I would say avoiding, eliminating commercial disputes, commercial claims, and time spent on that. I think, I've seen a focus on collaboration build those relationships and deepen them and strengthen those leadership capabilities I talked about earlier. And I think that that does help going forward in terms of doesn't matter if it's a progressive project or anything that we're delivering, to create an environment where we can solve issues together. And the first thing we're doing is not grabbing a contract to have a look what it says. So, yeah.
How about for you, Michael?
Yeah, I would emphatically agree with all of that, but maybe just to add to it, quality of assets, both initially and over time, is the other thing that I think collectively should exercise all of us in this room, right? It's this throwaway line that I have every time I'm in a forum like this one. I think when people look back, they're going to forgive us for the inflation that we're living through right now. People will understand what pricing looked like on a per square foot basis after the COVID-19 pandemic. They will not forgive us if the assets that we build are not of high quality and of high relevance to the communities they're meant to serve for the long time. And the thing that keeps me up as we evolve the model is one of the things that was the clearest benefit from a public policy perspective associated with DBFMs, which you heard Angela say this morning, and I would agree with her, I would do them everywhere if I could, is that it had a baked-in plan for life cycle and maintenance investment over time. Because I have a very, Sean's panel, by the way, was also fascinating. Not everybody's got a Sean Wiley to think about how you ultimately make sure that an asset gets invested in to the appropriate level in order that it has the kind of benefit to the people that you originally thought that it would. And we have to try to find ways, I think, of making sure that as we evolve these models, that we have enough in there to continue to incentivize all of us to make sure that these assets really for 7 generations are what they need to be to the people of Ontario.
I think, Edward, our advocacy, how we go to municipalities and convince them that, these new ways of doing things are going to work. What does success look like for you in that context?
At the risk of oversimplifying, I think success in progress is projects that actually get done and completed. And, that is an oversimplification, and I think how different parties might look at and measure that success might be different. So for a public sector party, it might be looking at how do we assess value for money, when it's a successful progressive project. Can we use the conventional approaches with traditional P3s to assess value for money, or do we have to do it somewhat differently? On the private side, it might be, are we no longer kind of blindly pricing risks? Are we better understanding risks and doing the due diligence that we need in order to price effectively? That might be how they measure it. But I think at the end of the day, it's if the project is getting done, to me, I think it's a success. Through all these panels, there's a lot of talk about progressives being just another tool in the toolbox. And if it's going to be a tool that's going to allow a project to get done, to me, that's success amongst all the other tools that we have.
Right. I want to thank the 4 of you. It's great. I mean, it feels a little bit like we're embarking on a new fun adventure collectively as an industry. So, we've got some early moving projects, and we'll see how those go and what we can learn from them. But I think what's fascinating as well, too, is the impact it's having in terms of how we think about our own behaviors and even more traditional, P3s. Because, as I said, the topic of collaboration and progressives, I mean, it was throughout the entire 2 days. So thank you very much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to you.